Good evening. My name is Peter Meehan, and I'm the president of St. Jerome's University. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this evening for our next in the series of lectures in Catholic Experience. We acknowledge with respect that St. Jerome's University and the University of Waterloo reside and operate on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our university is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land Frederick Haldeman granted to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River in 1784, that includes 10 kilometers on both sides of the Grand River, and extends from its source to Lake Erie. We give thanks for the privilege to work and live on this land, and we're committed to building respectful relationships with Indigenous people and communities to enhance our knowledge and to learn how we can have an active role in reconciliation. Since 1982, the lectures in Catholic Experience have been offered at St. Jerome's University to our local community, providing opportunities for us to engage with critical issues in our times. We've invited scholars, activists, experts, and religious leaders to address subjects including religion and politics, spirituality, ecological responsibility, religious pluralism, ecumenism, interfaith dialogue, religion, and the media, among others. This year's theme for the lectures, Legacies and Lessons, confronts themes including the increasing gap between rich and poor, the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion, sustainability and its implications for the very future of the planet, and justice and reconciliation with Indigenous people. Our hope is that the program of speakers we've engaged this year will allow us to explore, challenge, and walk our own synodal path to see the importance of encounter and dialogue, and to understand the need for changes in both the Church and the world that will be meaningful and lasting. Tonight we are pleased to welcome Joe and Stephanie Mancini from the Working Center, who will speak to us on living the virtues in the face of homelessness. Joe and Stephanie established the Working Center in the spring of 1982 as they completed university. They committed long-term to developing a community-based response to unemployment and poverty. Rooted in downtown Kitchener, the project areas of the Working Center serve well over 1,000 people each day, including employment and financial problem solving, meal production and distribution, St. John's Kitchen and outreach, affordable and supportive housing, emergency shelters, and social enterprises. The 30 projects of the Working Center operate out of 14 commercial buildings and multiplex houses. While the Working Center found its roots in serving the unemployed during the job crisis of the 1980s, it has important connections to St. Jerome's University, where Joe and Stephanie learned about the Church's social doctrine, from the groundbreaking encyclical Rerum Novarum of Pope Leo XIII, which first argued the principle of solidarity that calls on Christians to work for the common good and give preference to the poor and the marginalized, to John XXIII's Mater et Magistra, which, on the eve of the Second Vatican Council, addressed Christianity and the role of the Church in the work of achieving social progress. More than 40 years after founding their movement, the flood of homelessness has changed the focus of the Working Center, which they describe as, quote, walking through these times, searching for common work that serves the community. For Joe and Stephanie, this has included asking important questions, such as, what are the practices that inspire commitment to service while the social conditions on the ground deteriorate? How does bureaucracy stand in contrast to the work that needs to be done? What practices help to hold virtues amid secular culture? This lecture will explore the underlying questions that are integral to serving the most marginalized in our society. Joe and Stephanie have been widely recognized for creating the Working Center, including the Benemerente Medal from Pope Francis, the Order of Canada, and honorary doctoral degrees from the University of Waterloo. And speaking on behalf of our university, I have no hesitation in saying, with considerable pride, that they embody the highest values and aspirations that St. Jerome's has for its graduates. But I can think of no more important way to introduce our speakers this evening than to say that their vocations of service are at the service of the gospel, which for me recalls the parable of the talents in the Gospel of Matthew. Excuse me. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous man will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Please join me in welcoming Joe and Stephanie Mancini.
I guess it works, right? Okay. It's very ready to go. Where do we start? I guess for us, we have a lecture about what the Working Center is, where it came from, what the roots of this project is that grew over 40 years. And we know that it's really important to kind of talk about the roots of that project, and then how that project has grown, and then to show how those virtues that are embedded in the project have lived over those 40 years. But it's really interesting that it's the last 3 to 4 years where this work around homelessness has been especially acute in kind of coalescing the culture of the Working Center to do really important work in a way that's very different than even what was done 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And but it's so interesting because how does that culture carry itself over those 40 years? We've had this great interesting place to watch how that culture continues to thrive and live. So that's why we're taking this kind of opportunity to dig deeper into thinking about those cultural roots, those gospel roots. And this is a really beautiful place to be able to do that, because it's kind of our, for us, kind of our beginning spot.
I just want to tell a story. We sat on the stage right here when Henry Nouwen came in the 80s to speak here, and we came late, of course, which we always do. And there was no seats in the room was full, and they said, "Oh, come on, we're putting people up on the stage," and we got to sit right here and hear the chanting and the meditation of Henry Nouwen at the time. So this is like it's a lot of years, right? So Joe's like, "We're not 20 anymore. We got some different things to say." And it's a fun journey to think of that time and the years of time that we've been at this, and the consistent collective community, I think, that we've been blessed to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to go back and forth a little bit here, nudge each other. We're not scripted totally.
So where did that go? Okay. So then, this is weird because I can barely see that.
That's okay.
Did that go?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. We will go more smoother from here. So personalism as a pathway to integrating virtues into culture. So I didn't find personalism at St. Jerome's, but the philosophy of personalism kind of emanates out of Catholicism, but you have to look really deep to find it. And for us, there was 10 years of the Working Center, and kind of learning what the Working Center was, and kind of starting to explore Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker, that all of a sudden this idea of personalism came alive for us. Let me just... Was that? Yeah. And it was in the 1990s that, we started reading books like After Virtue. And David Cayley David Cayley had an idea series of Ivan Illich called Part Moon, Part Traveling Salesperson. And the series kind of got into the thinking of Ivan Illich, and then he turned that into a book, which is Conversations with Ivan Illich, and underneath that was really Illich's ideas of personalism. And for Illich, the personalist ideas was very much focused on, how do you serve others, and how do you integrate that into an organizational kind of work. I think you're
clicking. I'll keep talking. So as we learned about personalism, and we were trying to understand what is personalism, we're going to spend some time with that thought. We saw that Catholic social teaching was at the core of personalism, with the added step of a cultural program to live out the ideas. So it's not just a notion or a thought, but there's actually a cultural program. So we'd learned a lot in Tanzania about culture, about cultivating culture, about seeing community in culture. And we were trying to think about, how do you build a village? How do you create culture and community? So we're going to highlight about 5 different, I'd say they were ideas that were instrumental to us, guiding the Working Center as we integrated personalism into the culture at the Working Center. So Ken Westhues, who in 1995, he wrote a book, The Working Center, Experiment in Social Change. And he was a mentor and wise person that spent time with us, asking us good questions about what we were doing and where we were going all the time. And what he really talked about was the combination of the mind and the heart, connaître and savoir, and really worked with us on really, because we love to read, right? We read and read and read and absorbed all the things we could think of to read, and then we were acting as well. And so we started to think of, how do those connect, and how do we build a framework of understanding for that?
Yeah. And in 1995, we got Andy McPherson, who's also a graduate of St. Jerome's, to start to draw the ideas of the Working Center. And he was basically reflecting on Ken's book with that idea of heart and mind together. So then we kind of take this idea of these 5 different streams that all link together: Peter Moran, Emmanuel Mounier, Dorothy Day, Jacques Maritain, and Ivan Illich. So how do those people come together? Why were they important to us? And where did they take us as we kind of built this philosophy into the Working Center way? So the first step, or the first person who we learned personalism from in a deep way, was Peter Moran. And he was a French teacher who learned personalism. I got it right? Yep. He was a French thinker who learned personalism through involvement with a movement called Le Salon. And this was about 1899, organizing against inhuman working conditions. But he eventually found his way to New York City by 1932, already attuned to Emmanuel Mounier, the fellow we'll talk about next, and his French periodical Esprit. And this is where the philosophy of personalism was developed. And Peter, later on in the 1930s, was describing himself as, was describing personalism as a communitarian movement. And so this is kind of the roots of the Catholic worker. It's one thing to talk about Dorothy Day in a way of thinking, oh, they're serving the poor. But underneath it, there was this deeper movement, the communitarian movement, around a wider social program to kind of live out the gospel on the ground.
So I get to read my favorite Peter Moran poem, because it kind of roots us in the virtues that we're talking about. A personalist is a go-giver, not a go-getter. They try to give what they have and do not try to get what the other fellow has. They try to be good by doing good to the other fellow. They are other-centered, not self-centered. They have a social doctrine of the common good. They spread the social doctrine of the common good through words and deeds. They speak through deeds as well as words, for they know that deeds speak louder than words. Though words and deeds, through words and deeds, they bring into existence a common unity, the common unity of a community.
And so Moran was kind of building on Emmanuel Monier's ideas of personalism, which were really a critique of modern civilization, which he saw as being derailed by materialism, individualism, capitalism. And so a personalist society, according to Monier, should aim to guarantee human rights and prevent the state and other institutions from violating personal domains of human life. Positively defined, personalism wishes to organize society so as to develop in every level a maximum of initiative, responsibility, community, and decentralization.
So now we get to go to the Catholic worker, and we took lots of strength from the Catholic worker movement. And how Dorothy Day and Peter Moran met is pretty quirky and fun story, worthy of working center quirkiness. In December of 1932, Dorothy was covering the hunger march on Washington for the Commonweal, so she was a journalist. She was revolted by the shoddy treatment of the protesters, whom she called her people, those who she had formerly been working for as an activist journalist. But now, having recently become a Catholic, she felt she was on the sidelines. In The Long Loneliness, she wrote about her search for meaningful action now that she had become a Catholic. How little, how puny my work has been since becoming a Catholic, I thought. How self-centered, how ingrown, how lacking in a sense of community. The next day, after finishing her article on the hunger march, she went to the National Shrine of the Catholic University. It was on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. There, I offered a special prayer, a prayer which came with tears and with anguish, that some way would open up for me to use what talents I possessed for my fellow workers, for the poor. That comes from The Long Loneliness, her book. On Dorothy's return to her apartment in New York, Peter Moran was waiting for her. He'd heard about her, and he camped out in her apartment, waiting for her to come back. He was ready to outline his plan for a newspaper and houses of hospitality. Within 6 months, the Catholic worker movement was born. Over time, Peter and Dorothy defined personalism within the Catholic worker movement as a philosophy which regards the freedom and dignity of each person as the basis, focus, and goal of all metaphysics and morals. In following such wisdom, we move away from a self-centered individualism toward the good of the other.
So the line of thinking is Peter Moran in France, finds his way to Canada, then he ends up in New York City, and taking Monier's ideas of personalism And then finding Dorothy Day. And Dorothy has kind of a radical background, but has become a Catholic and is hungry to take these ideas. And Peter Moran is there to teach her, but not only to teach her, but to work together so that they would create the newspaper, Catholic Worker, and the houses of hospitality, and roundtable discussions to think about the state of the world and where the world is going. So that's one line, and then there's Jacques Maritain, who's an important Catholic social... Oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. Jacques Maritain, who's an important Catholic social philosopher. Also, he was associated with the Catholic Worker, the Catholic Worker movement. As a strong supporter during these years, he was working out the ideas of integral humanism. This is a branch of personalism, taking the Christian message of love of neighbor, serving others, forgiveness, leaving more for the other, radical sharing, and asking the main question, how can these gospel virtues be interwoven in society? So Maritain, as many of you know here, he was a very important voice, and he kind of links the Catholic Worker movement from a personalist perspective, and then it goes once for us. Yep, that's. I can't even see.
Super.
So then it takes one step further, and that's to go to Ivan Illich. And Ivan Illich was a student of Maritain. And there's a whole bunch of things the Working Center has taken from Illich. And that a couple lectures could be done just on Ivan Illich's works and the Working Center. But in this short lecture, we're just going to focus on two descriptions of tools from Illich. That these are basically a personalist philosophy of tools, and in the story of the Working Center, access to tools is kind of crucial to what the center is and the structure that it's been able to design. And so for Illich, when in his book, Tools for Conviviality, one of the things he talks about is people need not only to obtain things, they need above all the freedom to make things among which they can live, to give shape to them according to their own tastes, and to put them to use in caring for and about others. And in another line, he says, the crisis can only be solved if we invert the present deep structure of tools. If we give people tools that guarantee their right to work with high independent efficiency, thus simultaneously eliminating the need for either slaves or masters, enhancing each person's range of freedom. And even in the age of AI, Illich's concept of tools is as important as ever. And it's people's lack of the ability to use tools in creative ways goes back to the crisis in our society. So the Working Center has taken these 5 strands, the original ideas of personalism that Peter Moran found, and then the ideas of Monnier, and then and then the way that Peter Moran and Dorothy Day turned that into the Catholic Worker, and then understanding the deeper, more populist understanding that Jacques Maritain brought to at least Catholic society in the 1950s and 60s, and then Ivan Illich taking it even further with a very radical take on how tools are structured in society. And so those kind of 5 streams underline where we want to go with this next this next part 2, which is the practice and structure of the working center. And we start that with Andy, another graphic from Andy, which is, it's kind of hard to see, but it's the virtues. You know, and you can see the virtues as they're shown on the graphic, but we won't. It's almost too hard to see, so we won't do that. But one of the ways to think about the virtues for the working center, and so when we talk about the working center's virtues, they're not the working center's virtues. They're ideas, they're virtues that we've integrated into the life of the working center. And you won't find them on a wall anywhere at the working center. You will see them in a graphic. But they become a kind of a way of thinking, and people remember them, and they because they have meaning. They're really simple, but it's their simplicity that underlines kind of an organizational way of being. And so one of the ways that's really neat about it, about the virtues, is that Peter, something that I wrote as we were thinking about how these virtues would work. And it's a line I found that says, Peter Moran lived his personalism by living poor so as to leave more for the other. He rejected status in order that all may be equal. He worked his whole life to serve others, and he offered his work as gift. So very simple. Those 4 things: serving others, living simply, work as gift, rejecting status. Those 4 simple things. They come from the heart, but you can actually live your life by those very simple rules. And now, just to take personalism, just the next step is a community philosophy. So that once you have those 4 things from the heart, then your next step is to build community. Very simple again, but it's a philosophy. It's a way of being to build community. And then we take Ivan Illich's ideas of creating community tools. In all kind of ideas on the virtues, there's always like the public forum for living those virtues. And building community is certainly the first one. The Working Center took a different turn on the 6th one, which is creating community tools. And those are we've described St. John's Kitchen as a community tool. The idea of involving people in the production of a meal and the serving it together. But we talk about our community bike shop as a community tool. We talk about our cafes. All projects of the Working Center are community tools because we think that we are inverting the deep structure of tools. We're changing the structure of the tool to bring it into community.
Want to do this? So then, 40 years, you try to think about how do you hold the life, the vivre. We see the Working Center as an organism. It's alive, it's moving, it's changing all the time. We're following it, not creating it. Somebody recently said people at the Working Center don't seem very complacent. In fact, maybe overextended might be a better word. But when faced with complexity, the idea is to open up and expand into things, to bring beliefs into action. And it's kind of like, when we were young and thinking, is this what we believe? And if this is what we believe, then what? So if all these things we hear and see are our faith and our practice, how do we actually put them into action? So the pastoral circle became a tool that we used really early, and it was a great gift to us because, all that reading we were doing and all the people we were talking to, we found a way to frame it in a context that helped us hold this concept of virtues in the actual work that we were doing. So the first, where are we at on this one? So the first step is walking with the experience of people. So when we open the Working Center, we just listen. What's your experience? What do you need? If we're going to respond to issues locally, how do we know what the experience is? So rooted in the experience are putting our bodies into the place where history is right now. And that's our very first kind of step in the pastoral circle. We could do a whole session on the pastoral circle, right? Because it has lots of depth and practice in it. But then we'd be like, okay, why is this experience happening? What's going on? Who are these people we've read before, and what would they have said about it? What is our current structures and systems that lead to understanding the reality of what we're seeing the experience is? So depending on lots of wise other people than ourselves, right? Really try and absorb their thought. Then that's where, our whole ethic comes in. What's right and wrong in this? What's good and bad about it? How do we make sense of what the experience and the analysis is? And you bring it through this moral, ethical stance of understanding and belief. But then finally, you don't stay there, because man, we could all stay there. It's so easy to think about it or say what's right and wrong, but then you take it into action. And that action brings you to a whole new place, a whole new experience, and you start the cycle again. So you allow the day, the work, the routine to change your reality, your perception, and you go back through that cycle until it becomes a habit and a pattern of how you frame the world, how you make action, how you take steps.
Yeah. So the pastoral circle for us. Oh no, don't do that.
Back.
There we go. I think I'm back. Okay. The pastoral circle, again, it's actually a methodology that we found in 1982. There's a really great book by Joe Holland that I can't remember the name right now, but I think it's called Social Analysis and something else. But it was a methodology for how do you do community work, and we found that at a really good time. And then following that pastoral circle has been true for every project the Working Center has been part of. So again, that's a Catholic way of thinking. It's really see, judge, and act, but in this very easy to understand process. Over the last while, we've been describing the Working Center as a web. As a living system. And this graphic really brings together some so we talked about the virtues as part of this graphic, or as part of this building block or living system, but also other ideas like rooted in community, hospitality, work as freedom, access to tools, reciprocity, decentralized and integrated, a flat pay structure, making public space common, local democracy, community enterprise. This is so even with those, in the context of those virtues, we throw off those 6 virtues, that's one thing. Then we talk about the pastoral circle, and then we talk about all these kind of building blocks that are still essential to the life of an organization, so that these ideas live in the projects, and that's how they become part of the DNA and make the web come alive.
So another thing we could spend all night on is sort of the web of the Working Center, and it's one of our favorite topics. But what you see, the web is really important. So things can be overwhelming when you see the immensity of issues before you, the complexity of issues before you. The web makes sure we never act alone. It's a practice we build. How do you act within a web? How do you function within a web and hold the web as part of what we do? So when we talk about Working Center projects, we use the web to talk about them. And you can see before you our main kind of pillars of the web, or posts on the web. I don't know which language to use there. But supportive housing, emergency shelter, food prep, St. John's Kitchen and Outreach, education and community development, community tools. Our infrastructure teams, even our board, are all part of the web. There's no hierarchy. We're in this web all together. And then employment and financial supports. But then that's sort of the main high view. And then the next slide comes along, and gives you the individual projects. So decentralized and integrated, that's the web. So everything functions in a very understandable small pocket, but then it's all part of the larger web. And it's learning the practice of how do I do, Michael, how do you cook in the kitchen? Well, you're part of a wider web of things that are going on. And you're always doing one piece, but within a larger web of projects that interconnect and complement each other.
Yes. And we could go through each project.
We won't.
But we won't. Okay. Stephanie won't let me. So now,
that's when we shut your mic off, right? When you say things like that.
So what we'd like to do now, this is part 3, is to describe how those ideas of personalism, the web, the infrastructure of the Working Center, responded to homelessness in the last 4 years. And it's really a story, and we're going to mostly read it. And but it's a story that's illustrative of what's possible, of what an infrastructure can do that can stay rooted in its culture. Oh, I guess I'm starting, eh? Sorry. So I think you have to do a couple of those slides. So the reality of homelessness in the 1980s was such that we did not use the word homelessness to describe people we supported at the Working Center or St. John's Kitchen in the 1980s. It was barely a word. It was a word used in the United States, not so much in Canada. It was only in the early 1990s that that Toronto started to use the word homeless to describe the situation on the streets. But things started changing. In the early 2000s, in Kitchener, even 1999, the first out of the cold system was set up. And, then the number of homelessness, the numbers who are homeless, you could still count. We knew who those individuals were. So that's kind of, it was a very personal kind of thing. The Out of the Colds worked because people knew each week who the people were that were coming to their space. But things started changing in 2016 in a bigger way. And that was 3 years after the Out of the Colds had closed. The Out of the Colds closed because the drug issue was starting to permeate or percolate in the sites, and it was getting harder for volunteers to manage such sites. The numbers were higher, not substantially higher, but there was a sense that there was more breakdown and something was going on. In the meantime, sky-high rents started leaving people out of the housing market. Presently, this is going to in today's numbers. The definition of despair is when the average cost for a bachelor unit is $1,000, or even a one-bedroom at $1,900, while Ontario Works housing allowance for a single person is $390, or someone on ODSP $556. So if you're looking for a room and the cheapest room is $1,000 and you only have $500, there's not, you start to give up. So individuals who don't have, if individuals live in family, then they can survive on that kind of income. If the individual is in social housing or has some kind of a social benefit, they can live in that housing. But someone in the private sector who's on assistance, who doesn't have those two forms of assistance, family or social, they're left to the housing market, and we're seeing on a regular basis people losing their housing and going on the street because of that. But there is another thing going on. 2013, the gathering forces of industrial synthetic drug production broke out from the margins, making powerful drugs like fentanyl and crystal meth widely and cheaply available. 10 years earlier, Purdue Pharma had massively produced for the market OxyContin, and in the process opened the floodgate to wider public drug use. And so the reality of that drug use, it was becoming clearer and clearer through after 2016 in a way that one meeting at the Working Center, we were reminded of that story or that TV show of Lucy, I Love Lucy, and there's chocolates are coming out of the conveyor belt and just going so crazy trying to hold on to it. We literally watched that thing because we had this sense that the production factory of homelessness was beyond what we could even figure out. And this was one way of trying to gather that together. By the summer of 2019, we had documented that 250 people who regularly use St. John's Kitchen were not accessing the shelter system. Consequently, each night they were camping or scrounging for a place to live on any couch they could find. At the same time, we were struggling with the drug epidemic. And these were times for us, 2017, 2018, times of encampments in the parking lot at St. John's Kitchen, gangs of people unruly taking over the alleyway, drug use in the washrooms. A doctor at St. John's Kitchen wondered what was driving people to stick needles into their neck to get a better high. One culminating moment illustrating the doctor's point was finding a drug user on the bathroom floor, almost unconscious, with a needle plunged into his neck. Or another time when we were gathered for a memorial service to reflect on a number of overdose deaths, while in the hallway a severe overdose was taking place. We were witnessing firsthand the meaning of dislocation, what Gregory Baum called the weakening of the matrix of human well-being, the breaking down of the bonds of social solidarity, and the result, rootlessness, loss of identity, and spiritual anomie.
So it was 4 years ago this week. Father Toby's here on November 11th, 2019, that Father Toby said yes. We showed up at St. John's Kitchen one day. There was a big snowstorm coming. Lots of people outside. We said, this is not okay. And Father Toby said yes. And we opened a pop-up shelter, got beds and blankets and pillows and food and coffee before nightfall, and created a shelter out of nothing. 250 people used that space over 3 weeks, and then we moved to a vacant Tim Hortons. And people lied all over the floor on the ground of the Tim Hortons, and this was great. What a fun, kind of crazy community it was, but it was a place where people gathered, no framework, no structure, just personal action happening with people staying up all night to help make it happen. But then in March 2020, the pandemic hit. We soon had 80 to 100 people camping around St. John's Kitchen. Soon after that, a Better Tent City formed. Once we got St. John's Kitchen back up and running in May of the pandemic, it became a focal point for the homeless through ensuring access to water, washroom, showers, laundry, meals, and a daily drop-in. Soon over 400 people a day were using either the dining hall or getting a takeout meal. In October 2020, Morita's Kitchen was converted into from the kitchen for the Queen Street Commons Cafe into a commissary kitchen where we were preparing meals that were spreading out to all the people at the kitchen and then to the various shelters and places that we started to host. So we were cooking 700 meals a day, and we still are now. And it's a massive effort to create, distribute, and share this level of food. And then you see up on the slides too, in October of 2020, we opened University Ave dorms. in the former Hammer residence, student residence, and it's a 24/7 interim housing shelter where almost 80 residents who were camping before they came into UA to be housed. So then we absorbed UA, and then in 2021, and these are the places where that web is so critical, right? The resilience, the agility, the living system, the committed people all coming together to keep going through these years when a lot of people were not even outside for some of this time. As we absorbed UA, we started working with St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church to set up a warming overnight shelter with 60 beds using the church gymnasium and the kitchen. It was a hard winter for the church, but it was a time of grace. When the weather warmed, the wardens wanted their church back. The region had a plan, and in June we moved to Edith McIntosh Daycare building behind Cameron Heights, somehow fitting 60 people into the little nooks and crannies where children had been in daycare previously. And then by September, we were trying to get away from being right on the high school property, and we moved to Stephen Litt let us rent the Schwaben Club, the old Schwaben Club, for the King Street shelter. We started with 60 beds, it grew to 75 beds, and then in December of 2022, we went to 24/7. And what a big difference that made when people could have home, they could be there day and night and weren't, and 100 beds, yes, thank you, 100 beds, 24/7. We won't forget Christmas of 2022, I think just last year, if I can put my years together. 150 people came, so that was another big snowstorm. And we had some drop-in happening at the shelter. We fit 100 people beds. That night we had 150. So it's kind of a Christmas story of welcoming people in, even though we didn't have space. It took us a long time to recover from that, but it was a really beautiful expression of hospitality. In April, the region of Waterloo completed construction on the tiny home shelter on Erbs Road, and the Working Centre welcomed 50 people there, all who were homeless. About half of them had never hit the shelter system. They'd been living in encampments, quite disassociated, and moved away from regular kind of supports and services, dealing with significant addiction and mental health issues. So quickly, a small community has grown there. A place far away from the downtown, but there are washrooms, showers, laundry, a 24/7 food servery where our commissary food comes, a shuttle, and primary care medical supports are offered. So that's the example of the agility where the virtues came in to respond to the times, and the I think the flexibility of working within the web made it all possible.
This exhausting list is a 4-year story of the Working Centre's commitment to act on the homelessness issue. It doesn't mention the housing we already support, the housing we built during the pandemic, or the housing we've planned for and fundraised for 97 Victoria. This list is about an organizational commitment to live the virtues. It's about going the extra mile, about opening our hearts and minds to a crisis before us, to step into an extremely complicated space and to create change. This has been a burst of activity, a sense of mission to open new shelter beds, preparing and distributing 700 meals a day. The work that is at the core of this commitment is to establish these 230 shelter beds at 3 different emergency shelters.
I'll do this.
Yeah,
Yeah?
absolutely.
Okay. You first. You're first.
No, you go. You.
We're alternating. Each
Oh, I see.
location.
Oh, I
First.
see.
Come on.
Okay, I thought.
Read the words.
Okay, we're going to read them off one after the other, and I was supposed to start. Each location is 24/7, a place to call home.
24/7 staffing and all the complications that brings.
Dealing with the results of addictions and mental health episodes like delusions, anger, outbursts, catatonic states, paranoia, violence.
Dealing with the long and short-term effects of drug poisoning and overdoses, such as the acquired brain injury that comes from a lack of oxygen during an overdose.
Providing meals all day long.
Doing renovations to add showers, laundry, washrooms, and serveries in each of the locations.
Doing daily maintenance, daily cleaning.
keeping the plumbing going, and the constant emergency responses to make sure the toilets are flushing.
Responding to visitors and those who need a bed when we are constantly full.
Dealing with head lice, bed bugs, and cockroaches.
Building housing outreach teams to help people get connected to the minimal housing opportunities.
Building medical outreach even while people in the shelter have major medical needs, such as congestive heart failure, diabetes, punctured lungs, incontinence, amputations, frostbite, cancer.
Building court justice outreach as people in shelters tend to have a high rate of incarceration.
And then that very small thing, hiring, training, nurturing of hundreds of new workers into the working center culture. Because it's that team that becomes part of the web and teaching the meaning of what it is to work in a web.
Yeah.
So, we're coming to the end and you get to ask questions soon. So the deep meaning of this work. A popular theology, in Pope Francis's words, mercifully addresses the open wounds of humanity and creation, and this happens within the folds of human history.
Living the pastoral circle means that with heart and mind, people and organizations can listen to the lived experience around us, can engage and understand relevant social analysis, can bring the ethics of personalism to the work, and then create projects that make the theology come alive. This is how the gospel is lived, practiced, and developed on the ground. And that's it. I mean, there's a lot more.
So we could do that again and we'd probably have a better flow if we did it
probably
the second
much
time.
better. Are you up for it? No?
So we're open for questions and
Is that the mic?
Oh, Carol Ann knows that.
Yes, there are mics on each side of the
Look at that.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I'm a retired paramedic from this region. I remember when you guys were first embarking on your projects, and I know the resistance that you guys encountered. And so my question is, what were some of the lessons that you guys learned in how to overcome a lot of the resistance that you were having from politicians and social workers and all these people? Because I live now in a community, small town Ontario, Bancroft, and my husband and I, or my husband's now on a safety committee, and we've taken what you guys have done and had them come and take a look at what you do, and they want to start little blue houses. But it's a land issue. Where do you put things? All these kind of naysayers are there. And so those are some of the nuggets I'd like to hear. How did you work through some of the challenges that you were having? Because you saw how it can be done, and you never gave up. And I really applaud what you guys do. I just live 40 minutes from where Combermere is, and so I know some of the good folks up there and how they work closely with Dorothy Day. Thanks.
thank you.
You know, the beginning of St. John's Kitchen at St. John's Anglican Church, there were always those issues of location and business people and others, even the church people, having great concerns about, and this was before there were drug issues. I mean, this was just because there was one of the critiques of St. John's Kitchen was there's no such thing as a free meal, and that's really, Illich has a really, that's what Illich was doing for us, is turning upside down the structure of the tool. Rather than, feeling bad for, free market society and all its great values, we really had to think in a different way. And so then that's how important some of this philosophy is, because we had to root ourselves as an organization, as people, to be stronger than those critiques. And those critiques were strong. And, when people would say there's no such thing as a free meal, but we were involving people taking surplus food and producing it and serving it with the people who were coming for the meal. We didn't think of it as a free meal. We thought of it as a community. So then I think we just, every time, where I was going with that is, today, we have moved back to St. John's Church for a year, and it was really beautiful for St. John's Church to invite us back, or allow us to come back, to accept. We asked, of course, and they graciously agreed. But I was just talking. The owner of the parking lot right beside the church is not happy. 2 weeks later. So then it's a conversation. How do we? And the first thing I think of is, Connie, who's coordinating St. John's Kitchen, she needs to meet this woman, and we know that it's the human work. We have the same issue at King Street, and there were some particular neighbors that were really upset. And Tess, and it's not necessarily Stephanie and I, Tess, the woman who's coordinating at King Street, did a really good job meeting those people for coffee, bringing them to the shelter, talking them through. So really for us, it's always been about relationship. And it has never ended from the first day till now. This afternoon, it was the same thing.
Something that I think we're facing right now as communities is what I'm calling or dubbing aspirational grief. It's hard when homelessness comes into different neighborhoods and people are seeing homelessness in their own neighbors. And so they're like, can you stop that person from coming into my yard? And they may not even be someone in the shelter we're hosting. They could be someone from the wider community. We came to the neighborhood, and yes, people found the neighborhood in a different way, but it's inevitable as more and more people become homeless that it affects different neighborhoods. And people are sad that they have to lock things away, that they don't feel safe. But in reality, we have a huge divide happening. We have some people with very, very little, and people who do have homes and feel safe. And, we're always conscious of the 200 people that are outside right now. And we have spaces we could bring people into. But how do we as a community decide that leaving people outside is okay versus making it work to have people come inside in winter in Canada? It's the first time, I think, for this community that we've seen it seem okay to leave people outside. And that's a hardship for us to watch. And because we know who people are, right? As we welcome them every day and they're eating in our spaces or being part of our spaces. So they're harsh kind of realities we're talking about. So we just try to talk, welcome, open, constantly. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Over here.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Stephanie. You've always been an inspiration to me and many at St. Mary's Church. And I wanted to know if you could speak a little bit about the pressures that are inevitably placed on all of these organizations to move people through. They've got to graduate. What are your numbers? Can you just talk about that pressure, what you know about, maybe where it's coming from, or how helpful or not helpful it might be?
Yeah. It's a pressure the Working Center has ignored and skittered around since, again, from the beginning. And I guess because we have this philosophy that we're building a community, we're building a village, and then, and so the community, the kind of relationships, the connections between people are way more important than results. One of the things we learned, again, really early on is that, you might help someone find a job, but then they lose that job 2 weeks later or a year later, or their addiction issue is much stronger than the need for the job, or society doesn't necessarily nurture them. Maybe there isn't family there. Maybe there isn't other community once they get a job. So then, like, the reality is that people, like, I would see the world more like going up and down like that. And so so we've never placed our pride as an organization on an individual's end, but rather we've always seen the journey as being more important. So then sometimes that's gotten the Working Center into a lot of trouble, because we don't say how many people got jobs. Like, you almost never hear that from us. Or you won't say how many people got housing, or but we will say 3,000 people used the resource center for job searching. To me, that's good enough. Like, if we would hope that someone would read that and think, well, if 3,000 people use the resource center, they must have been there for something, and then kind of infer what happened. But it's not that we couldn't measure those things, it's that we don't really believe in measuring those things. And that's really hard on the funders. Now, we have found ways of measuring. Stephanie's a much better measurer than I am.
I would say the pressures are huge. The pressure to, we measure our money by how productive it feels. So if we invest in shelter, it's not enough that people have a warm space to be. It's like, how are they moving through and other people coming? And we keep saying, but there's no housing for them to move through to. So how are we, and it's inadequate. You see the rent amounts. People can't afford them unless you get a subsidy. There's no more subsidies left. Like, the cycles go on and on and on. And that pressure to be, I think we heard it in the council conversation, how many people got housed out of Herbs Road, and does that make it effective? And we're like, a whole bunch of people just came in from being outside and settled in a community and have only been there like 3 or 4 months. And they're strengthening their, you've got to recover from homelessness, an extended period of homelessness. It's hard on the body, it's hard on the spirit. You feel disassociated. How do you feel welcome back in community? You know this at a Better Tent City. We want to listen a little bit to the pressures, right? Because we don't want to get to the spot where we think we know it all. So we want to listen to the pressures that remind us to have hope with people. Because you can get pretty despairing when you're living in a shelter and you've got a 8x5 spot. But then we got some people built up a lot of belongings in the space, and then the region came along and said, too many belongings, you've got to reduce belongings. So then we had to turn the whole place upside down to take away some of the belongings so that the space was different and it was meeting, because this is a shelter and we're funded. And so we did a lot of this, and then it disrupted people's lives, but then the air was better in the shelter. So we're trying to think, okay, where's the benefits of what we're doing? When can we find the way to integrate this in a different way that isn't so kind of top down, but can we invite people into the dignity that they can have in the spaces they're in? And when is dignity just letting someone have the little bit of stuff that they want because they have nothing else and they've had so much loss in their life? And we're asking a lot of those questions over and over, and the pressures of the complexity of the work, and then the top-down pressures of funders and frameworks of funding, they're really awful, really. And I think it's if we were left to do the work, there's more joy in that than trying to be in the sandwich of what we as society think are the outcomes we want for the money we're spending.
Oh, there.
Yes, how are you guys doing? As I'm listening to you and what you're doing, and when you showed that web and then the larger web with all the different things that you're doing, I mean, where does this personalization and the philosophy of personalization, like, what I'm always struck by is there's all kinds of money out there. There's millions and billions of dollars out there. you can put up a building, like, I mean, everything is possible to be done. And the structural, societal structural thing is such that, we're watching condos going up left and right around here. And so there is no reason why you have to have this burden that two individuals have to stand up and say, I know it's all, the good work is all good, but I look and see, my God, we live in a very rich, full society, all the food, anything we'd ever want. And when will it, I guess the question is, what work is being done so that society takes care of this, so that the culture has a feeling and an attitude that no one will be left behind, that everybody will be taken care of, regardless whether they come out of an addiction and go back into addiction, got a job, lose a job, that everybody is taken care of. You know what I mean? Like it feels as though there's a possibility that exists right now to do that, and yet it doesn't happen. And you do all this work, and it's fantastic. And where would these people be without you? But it's like I just get the image of a society that would allow that to happen. The people living in those suburbs, the people living in those big offices, what are they thinking? Mm-hmm. And where, like, you know what I mean? Like, it probably sounds a little bit naive, but it's the truth, because we know there are societies in the world where they take care of everybody. They do take care of everybody. It's part of the society's responsibility. And
that's that grief, Michael, that we're talking about, right? There's such a grief for what we're witnessing. And all we can do is act into it. And that's kind of where we go. You're right. All those things, like, it's a stark reality difference. Important that, we just act into it and continue to act in, I think.
Yeah. Another longer lecture would be something like the Great Dislocation. And, following Karl Polanyi's work, like, so much of the cultural bonds in society have been fraying. And they're fraying, and you can make the argument they're fraying more than ever. Other people can make the argument they're less frayed. But if you think of Polanyi's argument, and Illich was very much part of that, which is that social bonds of community that might have existed in villages in the 1830s or whatever, less, like those social bonds of families are more tenuous, and then you have a free enterprise society where competition is the main driver of the structure of society, and the great benefits of society are very much based on competition, and so you're left with a society that doesn't hold together in those kind of social cultural bonds. And so we feel that society is less holds together than it did in the 1980s. So I think that's kind of interesting, that even though the society has gotten richer, the cultural bonds at the very bottom are far less useful for the people left out. And so that says that our society is going in the wrong direction. So you're seeing it right, but it's really weird that there is so much money, and actually not a lot of money would solve a lot for the people at the bottom, but there is no real structure to change that. Working Center is really, you're right, it's mostly creating structures for a small minority to get a little bit better stake in the way things are by the kind of help they can get for jobs, or getting a bike fix, or getting used goods, or getting a free meal.
But 250 people working, 300 volunteers, right? It grows. The more you just I don't know, examples, all we've got, example and witness and, challenge regularly wherever we can.
No, and so hopefully it doesn't come across as what you're doing.
No.
It's just it's a look at the broader picture and thinking, like, why do people who could do something go to sleep at night and this doesn't bother them?
And that's what people who are living outside see. They see people who have things and they have nothing. So it breaks down even further, right? It's in all of our interest not to have it happen.
Yeah, I get it. Thanks.
Marion.
Hey, thanks, Joe and Stephanie. I always love our conversations. I want to talk about you talked about particularly the past 4 years and just the exponential growth of folks who are homeless and how it's really pulled you into some things that you haven't done before. And you touched on this piece, but I wonder if you can go further and talk about how the synthetic drug production and use is further complicating that, and what your thoughts are on how we move forward with this in any way, because it just is, it's pretty discouraging, and day by day by day we see more and more people who you just wonder if there's a way out for them.
Yeah. And I mean, that picture you shared this week of 8 individuals completely spaced out on drugs. And that's the kind of reality that we see all the time. So that was a pretty, those photos were very poignant. There is there is a longer story of the drug issue, and that,
Which we can't do right
oh,
now.
no, we can. We have time. It's very important.
You can go on for a long time on this history. It's really beautiful if you want
It
to hear it.
starts in 1898. No, actually, it's like only 2005 where different, like, maybe another way of saying it is, in Ontario, this summer, in Smithville, a farm was raided and someone was making 1 million hits of fentanyl. That's how many hits were on site. So 2004 was when people started figuring out that the recipe that had been developed in 1950s was now producible with regular production machinery, drug production machinery, that you could sit in a farm, not a barn, but some kind of production facility. And there's also a house in Hamilton Mountain where fentanyl was being produced, and a house in Vaughan. So that was just 3 houses where, or barns or production factories where people are producing this. This is not like Mexico or China. This is our people, and this is our people using, free enterprise methods of production and distribution. And the distribution is very effective because it's all small. So, the people using drugs are selling it as well. They use those drugs and they sell those drugs so they can use those drugs. And once you're hooked on those drugs, you can't get off them. So it's a terrible thing that, we didn't see that in 1980. We didn't see it in the 1990s. We started seeing a little bit with crack cocaine. It was only like 2012, 15, where the drug issue as we know it now started rearing its head. So I think we're all learning what are the next steps. And we have a long way to go.
And I would say, we're trying to really think about those questions. So where's Working Center belong is kind of what we're trying to figure out, because we're not addiction treatment folk. We connect, we're connectors, we're access to, we're community builders, we're responding in crisis. Those are the things we're kind of good at. We partner with the addiction partners, but they're still learning. You get so sick coming off fentanyl, and then somebody comes off fentanyl 10 days and so unwell. They go away for 3 weeks, they come back and they're in the same building, and in 2 days they're back on the drugs. The cycle that people are in, it's awful, and it's really hard to get off of it. So we have some work to do on like treatment and addiction as a society to get those pieces
And
in
those
place.
facilities don't exist.
They aren't really there. There's not in the volume, not in the accessible method, because you have to, what do? Go to detox first, but then like the cycle's it's too fraught, and it's really hard for people. We're trying to understand this community tools idea as it relates to drug use. So we got 100 people sitting at King Street Shelter. What are they doing all day? Do they feel meaningfully engaged? Are there things they could be doing? So we're trying to understand, are there other ways that we can distract from? Because we know that all the research on drugs, it's about addiction help, but it's about building community and breaking through the disenfranchisement of disassociation and feeling separate from society. So what are the ways we can bring people back into community is kind of where we're trying to focus our next kind of, we do these pivot things, we call them. So how do we pivot one more time into this kind of creative activities that bring people together to help others?
And you can say that, and Working Center has such a great viewpoint, or has had a really good seat watching this. And the 1980s was the point where industrial labor changed, and we went, and so we've gotten to the point, especially by 2000, where so many young people are not part of the labor market in a good way, and so they're very marginal to the labor market. So it's the individual who loses family relations, who loses community relations, who loses work relations. And we have that in spades. And it's those individuals that find themselves in the drug culture, and then they're kind of wasted after that. And again, those pictures, they were all individuals who should be working. And when I say, I don't mean working, they should be part of community in some way, being meaningfully engaged. And that's the loss.
We'll go this way. Let's get another question.
Hello.
Thank you. Good question.
Hello. So I'm a student at the university, and in my studies, right now I'm studying the Second Vatican Council. And I noticed in your community outlook that you mentioned dynamic living systems. And to me, that kind of screamed out to the kind of new outlook that was brought upon during that council, and is kind of transferred on to like Pope Francis today, with like the church as a field hospital for the sick, and reaching out to the peripheries and such. I'm wondering, in your opinion, how much has your work kind of been influenced by that rejuvenation of charity and personalism from the councils and our popes so far, since the council? Or how much do you think the council was influenced by those people you talked about earlier throughout the history? Sorry for the
No, it's a great question. Ivan Illich was secretary to Cardinal Suens at Vatican II. So Ivan Illich kind of represented the best. So Ivan Illich was a priest at that point. He represented the best of Catholic thinking in the 1960s. And that's a longer story, but the Working Center has it's pretty hard to take on like the writings of John Paul II and Benedict. Like they don't exactly ring in the life of the Working Center, partly because of the language. Francis turned that right around, and so every word Francis writes feels like they're the words of the Working Center. And I feel like Ivan Illich had that same spirit, and that's closer to, and it's really kind of, as opposed to spiritualized ideas of the common good, these are kind of rooted, Illich and Pope Francis represent the Catholic thinking on the ground, feet on the ground, walking with tools and people in a way that isn't only about spiritualization, but is about how one lives in society. And I don't know. That's how I found it, anyways.
Working Center started we were the working center. We weren't the Catholic worker, right? We started to try to think in diverse kind of collective ways right from the beginning. That wasn't so rooted in maybe institutional church as we knew it. The Catholic bishops came out right when we were starting. What were we, 22, 23 years old? Really great to see the statement the Catholic bishops came out with. We were strengthened in who we were and where we would come from. Really reading Gospels and trying to apply the Gospels. If this is true, then what? And really kind of thinking about those kind of thoughts. And we love when the church resonates with us. When Father Toby made the choice to make St. Mary's a downtown church of action, a Catholic church of action, things like that are really exciting because we've been kind of working on the same journey for all these years, and it's really nice when the institutional or the framework of our church and the leaders in our church reflect the kind of learnings of the work on the ground. So we kind of go back and forth. It informs and we live and learn through it all at the same time.
And a good contradictory kind of way of thinking of that is Ethical Reflections on the Economic Crisis, which was released December 31st, 1982, which is, as the Working Center was already operating, a really important statement. Ethical Reflections comes out of the Vatican II thinking through the Social Affairs Office of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. But the committee, and Bishop Prue came to the Working Center to speak in June of 1983. And so we were alive with the ideas of ethical reflections and how of thinking about doing the pastoral circle around the issue of unemployment. And Bishop Prue was also alive with that. And Bishop Drew came to speak here, and they were the authors of that report. But that committee was shut down by certain bishops and cardinals in 1984, because it was a hot document. And then there's kind of a divide there, it felt like. And so then it had to be rebuilt as well.
We're getting time. We've got one more question. Yeah. We could do another one on just that topic.
Hello. So I've got a question here. So how do you balance the time, resources, energy that you need to meet the immediate needs, the immediate necessities of people currently experiencing homelessness, and the need to stop more people from becoming homeless, to avoid the snowball effect where more and more people become homeless, and then all the resources that you're already allocating to that become less and less? Yeah.
It's a good question. The works of mercy are a lovely example in the Catholic Church because they stand there as if the person before you has some need and you can meet it, then you need to. But that could take all of us and more, right? It's a huge, huge thing. We're recently trying this idea of preserving deeply affordable housing. So we kind of are pushing, we've got 97 Victoria, we're building new housing there, trying to make the kind of housing where the people we know could live and live safely. Then we're working on this other idea, a longer story, we think, which is trying to buy up houses that are affordable right now, before they're turned into condos, before they're gone. But, it's lots of capital. Those millionaires, Michael, you were talking about, we need a fair bit of contribution from that kind of stuff because we can create the ideas and the project, but even just raising the funds to do them is really a challenging effort. So I don't think we ever make balance. I think we're always trying to hold where's our vision forward, stopping and analyzing, right? That's where pastoral circle is really good, because you can go through the steps to really think about where is the analysis telling us we need to be because the experience is here, and then bringing it through that cycle over and over again. It's pretty imperfect, I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're good.
We're at the end, are we?
Dean here at St. Jerome's. It's my pleasure to just close us out briefly with some gratitude. So I am saving them from a squabble about who got the last word by having the last word, but please join me in thanking Joe and Stephanie Mancini for being with us here tonight and sharing about their work over the last 40 years. A few other logistics and thank yous. So thank you to our IT team here at St. Jerome's and to the Unmarketing group who has recorded tonight's lecture. So if you have a friend or colleague who wasn't able to make it this evening, you'll find a recording of the talk on our website, www.sju.ca/LCE. Thank you to our marketing and communications team here at St. Jerome's. They help promote these events. If this is the first one you've attended or you're interested in knowing more, there are some cards just outside the door with information about our upcoming speakers. This is the last one for 2023, so we'll look forward to welcoming you back for 3 lectures in 2024. Thank you to Dana Hospitality, who provides our snacks and coffee and tea. Please continue to enjoy some coffee and snacks and mingle with neighbors and friends and community as we close out this evening. So thank you all for being here.